Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of IDTALK4ED Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to this podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that's going to have you coming back for more episodes. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of this podcast, as always, I welcome you back and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So before we get into the main event, just as a reminder, if you are on YouTube currently, please hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. If you're listening from Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure you subscribe there as well. And for those who want to be a part of this Identity Talk community, we are now on Patreon, where you're going to get some more behind the scenes exclusive content. So if you've been with the community from day one or since today, and you want to learn more about the ins and outs of how this movement started and how we continue to keep going, please become a patron today. Every investment that's made into the platform is what allows us to bring on phenomenal guests like the person that we have coming on today. So please become a patron today. And if you want to catch up on past episodes or watch future episodes of this podcast, you can go to our YouTube channel, which is under my name, Sarfo-Mensah, or you can go to our main website at IDTALK4EDucators.com. And then finally, just to let folks know, I have a book coming out. It's not out yet, but it will be out in November. But you can pre-order it today on Amazon. It's called Learning to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culturally Affirming Classroom. I want to shout out the Rutledge team for helping me get this book to the finish line. This was a 3-year process, and it could not have been done without the power of community. The process started with community, with the call-ins, with the edits, with the collective feedback and counsel from so many different contributors. And we got to the finish line because of community. So the spirit of community is very much embodied within this book. And it's a book that we need to have right now in our libraries. So to learn more about the book, you can go to the book website at learningtorelearn.com. You'll be able to see the chapter overviews and some of the accompanying resources that you can apply to your own learning journeys. So look forward to speaking more about it in the coming months. All right, y'all. So this is the episode that I am thoroughly excited about because we're going to be talking about well-being. We're going to be talking about mental health and all those important things that we need to prioritize as teachers. One thing that we know about teachers, well, educators in general, is the fact that we don't always put ourselves first. We don't always prioritize ourselves. We're always worried about either our kids, we're worried about students, we're worried about our colleagues, we're worried about fulfilling certain mandates from our districts. There's so many things that come first before us. So this is the episode where we're going to be prioritizing us before anything. And today's guest is somebody who has been on her own journey towards prioritizing herself. And now she wants to share that journey with others and empower other teachers to hop on that bandwagon, which I believe a lot of teachers should be hopping on. But listen, I could talk all day about this guest, but without further ado, I want to bring on Dr. Heather Michel to the podcast to talk about her journey and how she got to where she is today. So let's bring Dr. Heather on so we can have this conversation. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
How are we today?
We're doing good.
Yeah, we're feeling good. You're looking good, looking
Thank
refreshed.
You. I'm about to have a week off, so I'm excited. Yes.
Awesome.
Yep. Little summer vacation here, so I'm excited about it.
Just some solitary time, or are you going to include a family?
No, I'm going to go with my family.
Awesome. Always better with family.
That's right. Always. Yep.
Well, listen, thank you for coming on. And I'm thoroughly excited about this conversation because I've had a chance to follow your journey from afar through Instagram and through other mediums, and you're somebody who truly is an advocate when it comes to prioritizing the mental health and wellness of teachers. And it's something that doesn't get prioritized enough, especially considering the climate that we're in, where we're already under so much pressure to provide safe and brave spaces for our students at the expense of our own mental health. So this is a conversation that is, I don't want to say right on time, I would say it's long overdue.
Absolutely. I would agree with that too.
So before we get into the meat of that, I do want to give you an opportunity to just share a little bit about your upbringing, and also how did you decide, I want to get into this thing called education.
Okay, let's see. My upbringing, I grew up in Washington State, Olympia, Washington. It's interesting. I was just talking about this in another professional setting, and I'll just briefly say that if I was going to characterize my childhood, I would say that I struggled as a student a lot of the time in education. And I struggled, I think, for a couple different reasons. One was that I grew up pretty poor. My mom was a single mom, and she was raising my sister and I, and we were twins. I grew up in a community that at that time, Olympia, Washington, at least the part of where I was at, I mean, I think it's more diverse now, but where I was at, there weren't a lot of kids that looked like me. It's a pretty white community, and we were poor, and we were twins. And I think because of that, and I grew up in a very fluent area. And I think because of those things, my sister and I were targeted. So a lot of bullying went on. And my mom was a nurse. She worked the 3 to 11 shift, so she couldn't really support my sister and I with our homework and that kind of thing. And so we just did not do well in school. So I was always pulled for like remedial reading groups. I knew what it was like not to know how to read in first grade, second grade, even third grade. I just was a low performing student, I think, because I didn't have that support at home. And so I think all teachers, their K-12 experiences are really formative for them and really inform their practice. I went to kind of an alternative college that really focused on non-traditional history and learning about oppression and marginalization and racism. And when I graduated from college, I wanted to honestly, I wanted to dedicate myself to the social movement. Like, I know that sounds, whenever I say that, I feel silly saying that, but that was legit my intention when I left. I wanted to dedicate myself to a social movement, and I thought I could be a lawyer or I could be a teacher. And being a lawyer just seemed like it wasn't the right profession for me. Like, I wanted to be able to see the impact on a daily basis. Like, I wanted to be able to see, I knew that I was going to need that. Like, I couldn't just write briefs or go to court, whatever it is, that lawyers do, write briefs or go to court. I needed to see something in action and have that impact. And so I didn't graduate with a traditional teaching degree. I got into teaching because I had heard about the Teach for America option. And so I got into teaching as an intern. I didn't have any formal teacher education experience. I was placed in Houston, Texas, and did my Teach for America experience there for 2 years and just fell in love with it. I just loved it. My administration wasn't a very positive experience, but being with the kids and putting all my energy into something and seeing the fruits of my labor and having those moments in the classroom, which were far and few between. First year teaching is hard, but I just fell in love with it. And I thought, I want to keep on doing this. So I moved from Houston to San Diego to be with my grandmother and live with her and continue teaching in San Diego. I taught first and second grade for 13 years, and I stayed in those primary grades because I just loved teaching kids how to read. And I felt that, especially working within marginalized communities, like if I can give students that skill, there's nothing that can take that away from them. And that's a skill that you need to thrive in society. So I really connected to that part of teaching, like teaching kids how to read and being a student that knew what it was like to really struggle. That was like my sweet spot. So that's how I got into it.
So when I was doing my research on you, and when I was on the Teachers of Colors Matter website, I saw that you made a statement basically saying not only did you experience burnout, we all know what burnout is, but then you said you experience compassion fatigue. And I had never heard this term before.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I had never heard of this term before. So I'd love for you to just unpack what that means for those listeners who may not know what it is.
That's a great question. So compassion fatigue is Well, there's lots of ways that it's being talked about or can be talked about. So compassion fatigue, there's vicarious trauma, there's secondary trauma. All of that kind of is in the same area as compassion fatigue. And what that is when people like nurses or people that are taking care of oftentimes young people, I mean, it could be older adults, but in our case, it's kids, they experience trauma. Not primarily, not as the people that are experiencing the trauma, but in a secondary form as they're witnessing their students experience poverty or abuse or neglect or being hungry or whatever it is that they're experiencing their students experience, they take on some of that emotional weight and emotional burden. And that's ultimately what compassion fatigue is. And one of the things I talk about in my work with Teachers of Color Matter is that is oftentimes to a larger or happens to a larger extent amongst teachers of color specifically. And that's why they have a different experience in education when you compare them to, our white female counterparts.
And I'll get into that in a second because I do have some questions about that. But I want to go back in time a little because you were talking about your experience in K-12, how you weren't able to get a whole lot of support from your mother because she was working during that time.
Mm-hmm.
You had your struggles with reading and everything else. But I'm also curious to know if there were any other struggles that you had as far as embracing your identity and showing up as your authentic self, because you did mention that you were in an affluent community in Washington and there weren't a whole lot of people who looked like you and your sister. So I'm curious to know how that impacted your self-image.
Thank you for this question. First of all, thank you for asking this question because it's something that, well, let me answer the question first. Yeah, it was a struggle because I live in Southern California, so people make a lot of assumptions about my background because everyone the community I live in right now is 70% Latino, Latinx. So when people see me, they automatically assume that I'm Latina and I speak Spanish, so that kind of exasperates it. But I'm Syrian and Italian and my dad is white. So Syrian, I didn't really grow up with my dad. So although that's part of my heritage, I struggle even accepting that as part of my identity. I know that I need to accept that part. But growing up, when people ask me where I was from, and they literally asked me all the time, not in a menacing way, but it was always the first conversation. It was always the first question that I would get up until college. So where are you from? And then I would say, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that question mean? Like, what are you trying to know? My ethnicity, my nationality, where I was born, and I was born here. And they're like, yeah, but where though? Where are you from though?
Right.
So yeah, I think trying to figure out where I was from and my mom didn't really talk about what her racial identity meant to her. Mm-hmm. And so trying to figure out where I fit, how do I experience my ethnic background right now as an American person outside of my community. When I went to go be with my grandparents, everyone that they associated with were from the Middle East and from Syria. And that's who we had Syrian food and we were hanging out. I mean, I don't speak Arabic, but we were hanging out with people that spoke Arabic. And then I would go back I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up. And then, we'd go back with my mom and we lived in this very white community and trying to figure out where there was no one. I didn't grow up around that Syrian community. Even now, I rarely feel like I'm rarely around people where it's like, okay, these are the people, these are my people. I belong here. And I think the absence of sense of belonging has shown up. I mean, when you have that absence of sense of belonging, it shows up in all parts of your life.
Yes, it does.
Professional, personal. I think a lot of times my friends, which the majority of them are Mexican American, Latino heritage descent, they call me honorary Latina, which I appreciate. There's still a disconnect there. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, that's what I would say.
Yes, you did. Very much so. And I wanted to ask you this. When you think about your experience of being other, how did that shape or inform your perspective on community, what that meant to you?
Mm-hmm. So community, it makes me think, kind of adding on to the question that you just asked, in some respects, I gravitated towards people that looked like me, even if they weren't Syrian, so the Latino population, my best friends were all Mexican because we shared the same experience of being brown in the United States. I wasn't raised Mexican, but I know what it's like to be a brown person in the United States. And So that shared experience felt closer to me. It made me feel more at home than the white community I grew up in. And I think community for me is just a shared value on making the impact. Like when I think about community, I think about people that have a social justice orientation, that want to make it the kind of impact that I want to make, and that have the same values that I have around making the world a better place and raising our kids a certain way. And to me, it might not always be racialized. My community has grown to kind of encompass these other things.
And I think that's the experience for a lot of people who feel like they couldn't find that place where they belong. So they just went to this process of creating their own communities of people who love them for who they were and embrace them for who they were. And that's how they chose to navigate life. And that's not to say that the disconnect to your culture isn't there. It's still there.
Yeah.
But at the very least, you have a home that you can go to. That's your safety net in many ways.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that.
So I want to go ahead and fast forward. So you went through Teach for America, you had your experience in K to 12, and then at some point you were a teacher.
Yes.
So thinking about what you do now, when we think about self-care and we think about mental health for teachers, I'm curious to know when your own journey of self-care started. Was it a pivotal moment that led to it? Was it an accumulation of events that took place that led to that realization? How do we get there?
So I would say I've always been kind of, I wouldn't say I've always been kind of, but I guess I've always had a journal. I've always had this creative outlet that I would use to kind of deal with some of the issues I was having.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was struggling in grade school, I would turn my paper over and just draw on the back and do art on the back, because it felt, I mean, and doing art is a way to, I mean, I know now that doing art is a way to regulate your nervous system. And I think it's therapeutic. I was just trying to cope with the overwhelming nature that school was for me, because I just didn't understand what was going on. And so yeah, I've always written, always done creative stuff, always drawing, always creating things. And then I kind of developed, I guess at a young age, I had anxiety. And I think that's also tied to poverty, staying at home by yourself, all these other issues, you know, struggling in school. And so kind of learning how to deal with my anxiety, especially I would say that was a pivotal point, probably in Teach for America, like those couple years in Teach for America. It was my first year teaching. And it was kind of like my first time. I had moved from Washington State to Houston. So I was kind of on my own. I bought my first car, you know, I was living by myself. And that first year teaching, I mean, that's going to test you. Like you find things out about yourself that you didn't know existed.
What?
Yes, like that first year, like the demons come out, like it's the thing. And I think that was the first time I went to find someone to talk to, like therapy. Like these are some issues. And she gave me some tools. And one of them was affirmations. Another one she gave me was breath work. And so those are tools that I guess, yeah, there was that pivotal experience, but there's things that I've always kind of leaned into, like, I guess organically, but then that first year teaching and getting a therapist for the first time, and then kind of building on what I was already doing. And then throughout my life, going back to those things, like when I was in the doctoral program and when I had my first kid, like always making time to do some kind of art or some kind of writing, or, you know, I always think about, even right now when I do my breath work, I think about that first therapist that coached me on how to do deep breaths and like how to use it. And hey, should I focus on that? And so having those things in place. But then when I moved from Houston to San Diego, I feel like I let a lot of that go because the teaching task was so overwhelming. I mean, I can remember there was a couple times where I would go back to it, but it wasn't as consistent as I remember doing it when I first started.
Because you were overstimulated by the work.
I was just like, I just threw myself into it. I mean, I just threw myself into it. I think because, well, part of that's just my personality. I'm learning now that part of what I've learned is that it's not necessarily the profession, it's how I approach work, and specifically social justice work, and the sense of urgency, which I think there is a sense of urgency, right? Like that's there. And so what I've learned now in hindsight is like every position I've had to like, okay, Heather, dial it back. Like if you're going to make this sustainable, like let's not learn the lesson we've learned so many times, like dial it back. So yes, part of it was just me like, you know, jumping in and, you know, just going crazy. But I think the other thing is that there's this toxic toxic piece to a lot of charter schools specifically, and I was working at a charter school, and
Me too.
like the running narrative for that charter school was like do whatever it takes, like do whatever it takes. And I was on board for that. I was like, yes, I am going to do whatever it takes, and feeling proud of that, feeling like a sense of pride that I could go the extra mile for my students. And I was constantly thinking about how to address their needs, and both academic, personal, but at the same time, there's a cost to all that. There's a cost to that. You can't show up and give 150% every single day. That's just not realistic. No other species does that, just humans.
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch. You don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur, or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalk4educators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalk4educators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. Yeah. Ooh, I'm glad you mentioned charter schools, because that's how I started my career. The first couple schools I taught in were charter schools.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar with the culture of charter schools, they operate as independent entities. So there are charter schools that are public, but let's say a school that's within a school district. If there were certain things that were happening within the district, depending on what state you're in, because there are some states that don't have unions, unfortunately. But let's say that it's a unionized state and there are some injustices that are happening. You could go to the union, you can file a grievance. There's a process you can go through to protect yourself from those injustices. But when you're in a charter school, it's just you. It's just you. And you're at the mercy of the board, the principal, and depending on what charter school you're in, the principal may not even be the principal, if that makes sense. They're not even the leader of the school. I've been in charter schools where it was the board that was the real principal, and the principal was just the messenger, or the figurehead in the whole operation. So they didn't really have any real power in terms of making decisions and pushing things forward. So I've had a chance to experience those instances. But what's interesting is when you first start teaching, that grind culture is real, what you talked about. And I think it's because we were socialized to believe that this is how you're supposed to be a teacher, because we saw everybody else doing that. And when you're a rookie teacher, you're thinking, okay, I'm trying to show everybody that I am invested in this work. I want to prove my worth. So we adopt those bad habits. And then over time, we realize that is problematic.
Yeah, it's really problematic. And I think because teaching is emotional work, I think that our school system basically survives off of exploiting that emotional tie that teachers have to the profession and to serving their students. Because it's the student, ultimately it's the students that, I guess, depending on whatever the extra work it is that they're asking you to do, you're always thinking about your students. And so, yeah, you want to do it, but all that comes at a cost. And then they pull on the emotional heartstrings. They exploit it. They exploit it.
Oh, we're going to get some teachers in trouble with this episode, because we speaking some truth here. So, Heather, I don't know, you've worked in the school district at some point. And for those who have never worked in a school district or have never been teachers, I'm going to just tell y'all something. When you're in a school district and you first get into the district, usually the district has steps, like salary steps. And the way it works is the more years you put into the school district, the more your salary incrementally increases.
Yeah.
So it can be a 1% increase, 2% increase. It all depends on what your union negotiates with the district or the state, right? and it's different for every state. But then there's also a way in which you can expedite the process. And usually that's by taking postgraduate level courses. So there's some people who decide I'm going to take a master level course or a postmaster level course. There's some who just go to conferences and they get professional development points or continuing professional development credits towards their new certification. There's some who end up getting a doctorate, but all those things involve money.
Yeah.
They all involve money, meaning that you have to fall deeper in debt in order for you to achieve the professional mobility that you're aspiring to achieve. There's something wrong with that concept. Just that idea that shared is perpetuating the grind culture that we just explained. In order for you to elevate your professional standing, you got to grind more in order to do that. You got to take more classes. You got to get an additional cert, which means you have to pay money for another licensure test or multiple licensure tests. The way it's designed is designed in a way such that grind culture is inescapable.
Yeah. I've taught at 3 different higher education institutions, and it's just awful how people are, like you go to a private Ivy League school and get a teaching credential for, I don't know, $60,000, $80,000. And then you have to pay, you're going to get a teaching degree and you're going to have to pay that back. Like, to me, that's such a disservice. How are we going to charge that much money? I mean, it's just crazy. I don't know. To me, it's like that right there is just, I feel like that's criminal. Like, you're setting people up for, I mean, in California, we're having a hard enough time just because the cost of living is so hard. How are they going to pay back their loans and rent a house that's in the neighborhood that they teach? Like, it's just awful.
I don't know. Y'all have to holler at Governor Newsom. Let him know, like, come on, man.
I mean, it's crazy. It's so crazy.
Yeah. But I think about that now, especially now that I've been out the classroom for some time. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that I don't know if I could ever see myself in that setting again.
Really? Teaching?
But it has to be within my own terms, not within the infrastructure of what I just explained. Like, it can't be, gotta keep on getting these extra classes, you gotta keep on getting these extra certs. I can't operate like that anymore, knowing how much work it is, especially now that I have a family. When I was teaching, it was just me for a long time before I had a girlfriend who's now my wife. And then we end up having a couple of kids. So now I'm a different person. I can't grind the way that I did when I first started teaching because it's going to take away from my time with my family. And it's just not sustainable at the end of the day. That's why we have the high teacher turnover rates that we do, especially since COVID came into existence. It's just exasperated to higher levels. So it's just getting worse. And this is in no way us encouraging folks to get out the profession, because we need teachers in the classrooms. We do. We still do.
Yeah.
But this is the reality of what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do miss it, though. I have to say I miss it. Like, when I go on a campus, a school campus, and all the kids are there, and they just smile. You make them smile so easy, and you walk into the library and it just smells like books and all those sharpened pencils. Like, it gets real nostalgic for me. I mean, I do.
But the kids are the bait too. They're the bait.
They are the bait.
They're the bait. Think about it. Whenever you're close to the edge and you're about to jump off, what's the one thing that always brings you back? Think about it. Hey, Miss Michelle, you coming back next year? Miss Michelle, you the best teacher ever. All right, I'll stay for another year. All right.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
It always brings us back.
Yeah.
Because the pulling of the heartstring, it never fails. But then that's what allows us to get deeper and deeper into the anxiety and some of the things that you address through Teachers of Color Matter.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, because I think that's why we're here, because you do such incredible work with that. And I'd love for you to just have the opportunity to share what are some of the things that you're doing through Teachers of Color Matter to help educators understand their worth, number one, but also how can they take better care of themselves?
So I would say the first thing that the first level of offerings would be my wellness resource. In my consulting, I champion 5 different wellness strategies that I personally have experience with, but I also think are critical for teachers of color in the classroom. And so those are affirmations, reflection, movement, breath work. And then the last one is think big, start small. And think big, start small is a strategy that I talk a lot about in my retreats and consulting. So again, that first layer of offering is my wellness resources. So I have an affirmation deck that's offered in Spanish and English. It's a deck of 45, and then 45 to 55 affirmations. And I give directions on how to use affirmations. Right now, affirmations is kind of trendy. People are talking about it a lot, and people are making all kinds of decks. But it's not just like reading a positive statement. It's really being intentional with 2 or 3 statements over a long period of time, or 2 to 3 weeks, where you can really find a perspective change, and it can really impact the relationship you have with work in positive ways. So I have affirmation decks. I have a wellness journal. My wellness journal, Clap for Yourself, 5-minute reflections for teachers of color. It has templates, it has blank pages, I write letters to the reader. It has some inspirational quotes in there. And that really it's a journal, but it has multiple access points. So if you are someone that is an avid journaler, you can use it. If you're someone that's just starting out, it has templates in there to help people that are just starting out in their journal practice. And I'm translating that into Spanish right now. Currently, it will be offered soon by the end of August. And then I have a Think Big, Start Small playbook. And that is a way for teachers to compartmentalize their to-do lists and scaffold their to-do lists on a time frame. So I have like goals for the year, goals for the month, goals for the week. And it allows teachers to record like their goals. And so they can take their ideas and their to-do list out of their mind and let it go if it's not within the time frame that they're currently working within. So it's just a strategy to help them like chunk the things that they're working on. So those things can be found on my website. I offer retreats. I was doing coaching. That's on hold right now because I just picked up another job. I just got offered an awesome opportunity. So I'm doing that right now. So that's kind of on hold. But I do consult with schools and districts that want to host retreats. And I have a series of 6 retreats that I will do with schools and districts that are open to really centering the experience of teachers of color. I always tell my clients, you don't have to be a person or teacher of color to benefit from the retreats, but I center that experience as a way to address mental health and wellness for all teachers, and in service of their retention and sustainability. That's really my underlining goal. Is we need more teachers of color in the classroom and the profession, and until we address some of those systemic issues in education, they're going to continue to leave. And so starting with the teachers themselves and thinking about what are the things they have in control of in their lives so that they can address some of these issues. And then I would say the third thing that's coming out, and this is coming out like literally, people that are subscribed to my email blast will get this by Monday, but I've created a framework, and then also a framework for addressing wellness in your life. And then also I've created a wellness questionnaire. So it will help you determine where you are in terms of your level of burnout and what areas of your life you need to support in order to mitigate that burnout. And so I'm offering that. I think I'm really excited about that because I think that having that questionnaire allows us to quantify and objectify the issues that we experience. And once you have that questionnaire, you have it and you're like, okay, these are the actionable steps I can take based on how I'm feeling towards my profession right now. And that's helpful because it provides a plan, and people feel a little lost unless they have that plan. And so, yeah, I'm excited about all of those things.
So you could all check out the Inspired Teacher Retreat series on the Teachers of Color Matter website, which will be in the episode notes. I just wanted to flash that for our viewers. Yes. I want to ask you this. So we're talking about self-care. We're talking about mental health, mental wellness. But one thing that I struggled with, especially when I was in the classroom, was accepting affirmations, taking the time to give myself credit for things that I'm doing. Because I think as teachers, we tend to get into this mode of trying to diagnose problems, trying to figure out what's not working. What do we need to improve on as opposed to what is working? So I just want to know why. Why do we have such a hard time practicing that self-gratitude. Why do we have this reluctancy to do that, especially when we're in the thick of things?
I think that teachers, and especially teachers, are predispositioned to focus on the negative and to focus on, maybe not predisposition, but what do I want to say? They're in a position to experience more negative messaging, right? And I think the thing that happens with teaching that doesn't happen in any other profession is that there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong that the teacher does not have control over. So when you start your day, you're fresh, you're going in, you got your coffee, whatever, and you have an idea of the way it's going to roll out, but the way it actually rolls out cannot happen the way you're supposed to. And there's all these opportunities, like, because you're managing like 24 plus students, and they're all coming in with their own issues for that day,
Right.
their own experiences, their own level of tolerance, their own, like, how did their morning go? And to be able to manage all of those things and also keep your lesson successful and on track, there's a lot of room for error there. I mean, just the whole idea of teaching, there's a lot of room for error. So it's not realistic. I mean, it happens miraculously in a lot of classrooms, but I'm saying that there's a lot of room for things to go wrong. And when things are consistently going wrong, I mean, you just have a bad day and several things are happening and they just derail you, or whatever happens. Someone loses a tooth, there's an assembly that you weren't planning on, or principal comes in for observation. It's easy to get caught up in the things that aren't working right, because you can see the evidence, like, chaos ensues, or, whatever happens in the classroom to trip up the whole orchestrated event that you were planning to happen. And I think it's easy for us to kind of focus on the negative. And I think we all come into teaching with a certain level of baggage that we're trying to deal with. And so if we've gotten our own, especially teachers of color, especially, I can speak definitely for this experience, like, being a struggling student, if something goes wrong or something, that was something that I internalized as a child. So if something goes wrong in my classroom, my immediate go-to self-talk response is, there I go again. I'm not doing it right. I'm not good enough. I didn't do it right. I don't know what I'm talking about. Do I have the expertise for this? I mean, I could be a teacher for 13 years. I mean, I was a teacher for 13 years, and I still would have that default negative voice coming and talking to me. Like, it's like, no, this one experience didn't dismiss 13 years of expert time in the classroom. Like, this was a bad day. This is an isolated event. But because, you bring your own perspective, your own experiences from your own K-12 experience, your own childhood into the classroom, that's going to be compounded. And I think for that reason, it does facilitate this focus on the negative, and the focus on, like, I'm not doing it right, or I'm not doing enough. And I think that's another point I would say, is that if you're working in a community, in a marginalized community, you're not going to be able to do enough, because the needs of your students will never be, you can't address all the needs of your students with all the things that they're bringing into the classroom. Like, you're just never going to be able to do that. So because the need is higher than than your capacity to support, you're like I said, you're at that predisposition where you're like, well, I'm not doing enough, because there's evidence of it. Like, I'm not reaching all of my students. I'm not. So that's what I would say about that. And that's why affirmations are so important. And if I can I just add one more point to that?
Go for it.
I think too, like, I think as people of color, I think that in the teaching profession, I think that we get our value is put on how much we can produce, how much product we can do, the test scores of our students, how much output can we do. We've been socialized that way, but then there's all these structures that support that socialization. And so it's this super focus on product, and, we're a part of that. And so we're like, okay, why am I going to give myself gratitude if there's another set of students that are coming that are going to need my same level of the same high level of support? There's just a lot of different things working against us. So again, affirmations.
And I think in terms of productivity, we're in the education system that values quantitative results over the qualitative.
Yeah.
Because I know for myself, I was more about the qualitative. I knew that going into every year, students had to show growth, and the only way I could show the growth was through data, quantitative data. Mm-hmm. I knew that, and it was tied to my evaluation.
Yeah.
But for me, it was really about the lessons that students learned from me. It was more about 10, 15, 20 years down the road, a former student sees me in a random place, and they're like, yo, Mrs. Sarfo-Mensah, I still remember when you did XYZ. Because of this one thing you said, now I'm doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
That's the data that your evaluator is never going to see, because that's 15, 20 years down the road.
Yep.
So I wanted to say that. And also, this actually leads to my next question, because you're now working at the Residency Lab, like you told us, like as a
Mm-hmm.
director.
Mm-hmm.
So you're coming across pre-service teachers or teachers who have interest in wanting to get into the teacher profession, right? And there are a lot of teachers who look like us, Black and brown educators, who are passionate about this work, who come in with the responsibility or with the intention of being that mirror for the Black and brown students,
Mm-hmm.
which then brings about an added layer of responsibility
Yes.
and pressure on
Mm-hmm.
us.
Absolutely.
So when you think about the invisible tax on
Mm-hmm.
Black and brown educators
Mm-hmm.
and that added responsibility, as someone who works with pre-service teachers and specifically those of color, what advice or words would you give to a new teacher of color without succumbing to the racial battle fatigue?
I would say the first step is recognizing that you can have a relationship with your profession that's not being modeled out there, right? Like you have to recognize, like there's teachers that are so impacted by and burnt out that they don't want to engage in mental health and wellness, even on a personal level, because they're just like this, they just dismiss it. But they don't see that they can have they're so exhausted that they don't have the capacity to dream outside of the reality that they are currently living in. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
new teachers are fresh. They're a little bit more, easy to talk to. And that's what I would say. First, you need to recognize that you can have a relationship with your profession that's not being modeled out there. Second, I would reflect on the wellness strategies. I would either explore and investigate which ones build you up and fill you up the most, because there's so many out there. There's micro wellness strategies, there's macro wellness strategies, and reflect and think about the ones that are going to, or that impact you the most in terms of your level of your stress, your nervous system. I talk about 5 in my retreats, but there's so many things that you could do specifically to build yourself up. And then I would say schedule. I know this seems like a chore, but actually scheduling time to take care of yourself throughout your week and prioritizing that time, making sure that you have it blocked out on your calendar or on your to-do list, and doing that first before you feel that pressure to do all the other stuff that you have going on. But you need to 9 times out of 10 do the thing that's going to support you and build you up first. And then lastly, I would just say give yourself grace. Like you're not going to you create a plan, but you're not going to meet that plan 100% all the time. So you get out the bandwagon for a week, the next week just jump right back onto it. Like it's a journey. It's not an end product. It's not a checklist that you just check off all the boxes. Like I've been doing this, I'm on my wellness journey for a while now, and there's months where I won't work out, or other times I'm hitting it every day, or I haven't been writing in my journal for a while. I really got to get to doing that again, so we're all on this journey. It's about taking action consistently for a long period of time, for a whole school year or for a month. And so that's what I would say.
Great advice. Great advice. Just giving ourselves grace and not putting so much pressure on ourselves to perform and engage in like the toxic productivity
Mm-hmm.
that we end up getting socialized into. So,
and I would also I just want to add, if I could add just one more thing.
yes.
I think what happens a lot of times is that we're dealing with, big emotions, anxiety, depression, stress, burnout, all those feelings, like they impact your body, and you can feel them in your body in different places. Like you get headaches, stomach aches, and they feel like really big and they're feeling overwhelming. But the message I want to make sure that I impart is that you can do small things to address those big feelings, and they will consistently have an impact. And so I think a lot of times, like, people will dismiss affirmations or deep breathing. It's like, okay, what is deep breathing going to do? Or, like journal writing, like, how is that really going to help? It helps. There's small things. And, you're not going to go from like depressed to like totally excited happiness, but you are going to see over time that different relationship with your profession. And that's really what I want to impart to people. It's like you're having those big emotions, but you don't have to overhaul your lifestyle. You don't have to change the way you're living your life, but you do have to prioritize yourself for 5 to 10 minutes every day, and you deserve that. Like that's a human, that should be a human need, a basic human need. Like, yes, let's pour a little bit into myself after doing all this stuff for all these other people.
Yeah. I mean, we should normalize that. But listen, thank you so much. This has just been a great conversation. We could keep going on, but then I wouldn't be able to go to sleep.
You gotta go to bed.
Yeah, but this has just been an awesome conversation. And I want to end with this final question. So, Dr. Heather Michel, how do you stay true to the teacher in you?
I stay true to the teacher in me by making sure I'm first showing up for myself, and really staying engaged with my purpose. Why did I join the teaching profession in the first place? Why did I want to make an impact with children? And I tie that purpose, or when I tie that purpose to ideas that are bigger than me, like social justice, it's easier for me to continue the work because the issues I want to impact are still there. And so I take myself out of the equation and I lean into that purpose, and I can continue showing up for my students, showing up for my community, and showing up for myself.
There it is, y'all. Nice and straight to the point. But thank you for coming on to the podcast. I don't know. We might need to do a part 2.
I'm in. Part 2. I'm ready.
I always say this to almost every guest because 1 hour is just never enough time to delve into these very nuanced and complex topics, but I'm always appreciative of the dialogue. But yeah, let people know how they can connect with you on social media. Also, you could share the Teachers of Color Matter website so people can learn more about your services and offerings, and we'll just go from there.
Okay. My website is teachersofcolormatter.com, and I'm most active on Instagram under the handle Teachers of Color Matter, or excuse me, Teachers of Color _Matter. So you can reach me there, and also on LinkedIn under Dr. Heather Michel, just my name.
All right, there it is, y'all. So please get connected to Dr. Heather on LinkedIn, Instagram. She is doing some incredible work. Thank you again.
So much. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And have a good vacation with the family.
Thank you.
And rest up. Do what you have to do to recharge and revitalize.
That's right. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, y'all. So we're about to end another episode of IDTALK Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, y'all.